So hi, my name is Dan. I work on Ionic Framework for my job, and I'm here to talk about it tonight. So I actually just dove into my first slide already. So I'm Dan Bucholtz. I'm a software engineer for Ionic. I'm very active on social, not annoyingly so, but pretty active. Please follow me if you're interested in what I have to say. It's at Dan Bucholtz on Github and Twitter. So prior to Ionic, I worked at Brady Corporation in Pewaukee, as well as a creative agency called 7 Summits. I got started with Ionic as a tech lead of the mobile development group at Brady. We were playing around with a different cross-platform solution called Xamarin. It was one of the big ones from a couple years ago, recently bought by Microsoft for buckets of money. And anyway, we were really unhappy with Xamarin. It wasn't working for Brady. Despite being a C# shop too, so imagine that. We tried Ionic at Brady and we just fell in love with it. It worked perfectly for what our business had to do. So that's kind of how I got my start with it. Eventually I ended up joining the company because I like the product so much. So what is Ionic? So Ionic is an ecosystem of tools to build cross-platform mobile apps. Most importantly from that, you use web technologies when you use Ionic. So you'll be using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. The core guts or vision, if you will, of Ionic is that Ionic is a set of UI controls that are built specifically for mobile. So everything is very, very touch-friendly. They look and feel great, too. So let's just, we got someone at the back door there if you want to let them in. So let's just take a trip back in time here. So Ionic was created back in the olden days, a very, very long time ago in 2013, which if anybody's pretty into hardcore front-end development, that's like eons ago. The web moves really, really, really fast. So diving into more what Ionic is, Ionic took the world by storm. There wasn't anything really like it. There wasn't a great way or an integrated solution to build mobile apps if you're a web developer. So Ionic 1 piggybacked on top of Angular. AngularJS was the bee's knees back in 2013, 2014. Everybody and their mother was using it. It had 1 million stars on GitHub. And that, if you follow Google Trends, the slope was just going up and up and up. Well, the Ionic team saw an opportunity there. They knew that there was this space where we needed a way to build these mobile apps with web technologies, and they saw a really, really natural fit with Angular. When you combine the two, Ionic became a rocket ship and became really popular, really, really fast. Eventually, it's grown popular enough that it can really stand on its own now. So Ionic was a way that web developers had a new tool in their belt. They could finally put that iPhone to use. If you've done a lot of native mobile development, it's complicated. It's not just plug your phone in and magically deploy an app. You need to install Xcode, or you need to install the Android developer tools. You need to install drivers. In many cases, it can be a freaking nightmare. With Ionic, the barrier to entry was significantly lowered. I would argue that Ionic became really, really popular because it was really easy. So when let's say you get a new Mac, right? If you want to install or create an iPhone app, just a hello world, it takes a couple hours from when you unbox that Mac to when you can actually run that thing on an iPhone, because you need to install certificates all over the place. You have your 7 GB Xcode download. You need to install developer tools, which requires a restart. There's all kinds of junk that you need to do. That's just awful. With Ionic, you can install the Ionic CLI. Node comes pre-installed on most development-friendly operating systems now. So you type npm install Ionic -G. 2 minutes, you're up and running. You can deploy an app in 2 minutes. So web developers could develop their app in the browser. They didn't need to deploy to the phone until they were ready for that stage. You got the hello world up and running very quickly. So you didn't need to learn this entirely new tool set. So when you start an Ionic app, I don't know how many of you have worked with Ionic, but you run Ionic start. Ionic start my app blank. You'll get a blank starter. Ionic start my app tabs. You'll get a tab template. Ionic start My App side menu, and you've got the little hamburger menu in the top left. So it's very, very easy to get the shell of the application up and running. Ionic Serve. This is how developers build their apps essentially. With Ionic, you do the vast majority of your development in Chrome. So Ionic Serve basically spins up a live reloading web server. So every time you make a change to your code, it recompiles it or reassembles it, sends it out to the browser, refreshes the page. Then there's Ionic Run. That's the easy way to run things on a device. You don't need to mess around with Xcode. You don't need to mess around with Android Studio. You just run Ionic Run iOS or Ionic Run Android. Very, very easy. So in addition to that, and like I said, this is just a quick history lesson. Ionic is 100% free and open source and always will be. It's MIT licensed and you can't revoke that, so Ionic's here to stay. There is a huge, 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 huge awesome community around Ionic creating themes and plugins and all sorts of stuff. It's very similar to WordPress in that they have this really rich ecosystem around it. In addition to that, there's also services and things of that nature to support from the smallest startup to the Fortune 100 companies. So just to brag a little bit, Ionic's one of the most popular projects in the world. It's in the top 30 or 40 on GitHub. It has 28,000 stars, and there's 3 million apps have been built so far with Ionic. So who builds it? Believe it or not, Ionic is a team in Madison, Wisconsin. One of the few very, very software-oriented companies in Wisconsin. They were founded in 2012 by a couple kids from Shorewood, so just north of here. The company itself is very well funded and will be around for many years to come. That's important if you're at work betting on Ionic. I know at Brady, when I was the tech lead, that was a concern of mine, right? You don't want to bet on this technology and have the company get bought or have them go under, and then you're just screwed. So Ionic is very well off financially. We intend to be around for many years to come. So circling back to modern day, it's 2017 now. That is just mind-blowing to me in and of itself. But a lot has changed since 2013. So AngularJS, the original Angular, is no longer the big fish in the pond. There's all these new competitors and new technologies around it and different, potentially better ways to build apps. So let's just take a look at what changed quick. Whoops. Pretty much everything has changed. I would say that this is my approximation, but there are probably 7 million new developer tools since then. From Grunt, Gulp, Broccoli, Chai, Mocha, the list goes on and on and on. There's hundreds of them, and they're all too complicated. And for the most part, they all do the same thing. There's 10. If you need to accomplish one task, I bet there's 20 tools that you could find on NPM that do the exact same thing. So it's extremely complicated. It's this huge ecosystem that's trying to find its way. Ionic aims to be kind of a throwback. So when you were in the Angular 1 world, where everything was simple, where you didn't need to worry about configuring Webpack or setting up Babel or all that crap, there's a funny tweet that I've seen circulated a few times where it's two developers having a conversation. They were at a hackathon, and the guy's like, "Oh, what did you do at the hackathon?" And the other developer responds, "Oh, we got Babel set up." And then he's like, "That's it?" He's like, "Yep." So 12 hours to set up Babel. It's just crazy. So in our humble opinion, just all this stuff is too complicated today. There's too many tools. The mental strain of understanding and following all this stuff is exhausting. So here are the big things that changed. There's a few things that actually matter that changed. So in JavaScript, previously, there was no notion of a module. And having modular code, you kind of had to implement or roll your own. With the ES 2015 standard, modules are now a first-class citizen, and by an extension, classes too. So you could always do a class, if you will, in JavaScript, but it was kind of a hacky way to do it. So it was really just functional inheritance. It was kind of goofy. Now pretty much everybody that is trained in computer science understands what a class is, and it's just much more logically clear, in my opinion. The asynchronous story got much better in the past few years. Promises have been around for a long, long, long time, but they've always been one-off implementations, whether it's Q or Bluebird or any number of implementations of it. Now they're built right into V8. and I guess all the JavaScript engines. In addition to that, observables are quickly becoming a first-class citizen as well. I'm not as big of an observable guy as some people, but there's definite value in it, and they're becoming more of a standard in the ecosystem. You're seeing more and more usage. Those two things combined make exception handling and asynchronous stuff on parity with exception handling and synchronous code, which makes JavaScript a million times easier to write and reason about, especially if you're building a complex system. The other big change is NPM blew up and became gigantic. NPM is just a beast. I was reading the other day that there's been 100 billion packages downloaded from NPM. That milestone was hit last week. That is absolutely insane, in my opinion. So there's a package for literally everything you could imagine on there. There's probably 20 packages for everything you could imagine on there. So most importantly for us, though, Angular 2 came out. So Ionic, like I said, we're besties with Angular. So if Angular 2 is coming out, well, it's a natural fit to make an Ionic 2. So all of these changes combined, the major ones, were pretty much game changers for Ionic, and we had to fundamentally rethink how we built the product. And that resulted in Ionic 2. Ionic 2 is a ground-up rebuild of Ionic. It feels just like Ionic 1, but it is much easier to use. So, just a sidebar. It's Semver makes saying something is Ionic 2, or like giving a version number behind something, kind of silly, because Ionic 3 is coming out in like 2 weeks. Then there'll be an Ionic 4 and an Ionic 5 and so on and so forth. So from our perspective, it's just Ionic. Ionic 1 is Ionic 1, and it's a thing of the past. We're still supporting it, but Ionic 2 is our future. So we're all in on it, and it's just Ionic going forward. So I somehow managed to lose a slide in here, but that's all right. So what's new in Ionic? So Ionic has always been about making these first-class mobile apps. So mobile apps are bread and butter. They're built on top of Cordova. Many people don't even know they're built on top of Cordova. We abstract that quite a bit. But with Ionic 2, we've added a couple citizens to that game. So no longer is it just Cordova or these mobile apps. We also support desktop apps like Slack and Spotify. And we're all in on this new technology called progressive web apps, be it mobile or traditional desktop computing. Ionic right now, the whole team is really focused on two things: code splitting to make applications lightning fast and to make it transparent and easy so users don't need to worry about that, and then desktop support. So we're going to have, we actually just shipped it last week, a grid system very similar to Bootstrap's grid system, and we're also implementing a split pane system so that you can have like master detail views or even extended beyond that. So it'll be very, very similar to how iOS implements multiple view controllers operating independently. So the dream for all of us, I'm sure, is to write an app once and deploy it to every device imaginable. The more eyeballs you get on the thing, the better your business is going to do typically. So our vision is, how can we make this thing look great on every screen? And our solution for that is something called platform continuity. So we know how to detect what platform you're deployed on, and we adjust the look and feel of your app accordingly. So this is just a sample Ionic app right here. This is our conference app. And there are the three major platforms that we have: iOS, Material Designer, Android, and then Windows 10, essentially. So all of these, it's the exact same code, but the CSS behind the scenes, let me say this, the CSS that the user would write 9 times out of 10 is the same. But your broad scale theming is just inherited from the underlying platform. So your typography, your default header colors, your icons, things of that nature, you just end up with a really cohesive look and feel on every platform. So let's talk a bit more about Ionic 2. So what else is new in Ionic 2? So in Ionic 1, you would write these apps in vanilla JavaScript, and that's good. It works well. One of the things that we found is that it doesn't scale. So if you have an app with like 30 pages and you have 5 developers working on it, it is really, really, really hard to tell if a change somewhere in the app is going to break, right? So if someone somewhere in the middle of a 1,000-line class or something changes one little line, the thing can break. And of course, that is true with TypeScript as well. But with this new tool called TypeScript, you basically get a compiler that can do a lot of testing for you. It basically validates that you're not going to break your code. TypeScript is amazing. I was extremely skeptical of TypeScript when I started at Ionic, and even when I started using Ionic, I refused to use TypeScript. I implemented my own build process to use Babel and all that stuff. Did the hackathon thing, spent like 12 hours implementing Babel because I didn't want to use TypeScript. But in the end, that was stupid. TypeScript is freaking awesome. I cannot imagine anyone using it and not falling in love with it if they give it a fair shake. Likewise, VS Code, the editor from Microsoft. I don't know when Microsoft got cool again, but VS Code is the shit. It is awesome. So something else that's new in Ionic, and this is really the bane of our existence, routing and web apps is way too hard. Like, if you have anything more than like a basic route system where it's like one view per page or you're representing exactly one state in the URL, it can get really complicated to both set up and to, well, the initial setup's always complicated, but to implement and then to reason about what's going on, it can get really, really nasty. So with Ionic 2, we kind of took a different approach to this problem because we want to be easy to get up and running. So we want the routing to come after the fact. So when you first build out your app and you're in the hello world stage, prototyping, figuring things out, I don't want you to have to worry about UI router or the Angular router or any of that stuff. That stuff's too complicated and it's too error prone. It's just going to cause you trouble up front. And believe me, I know I'm in the weeds on GitHub every day, and that's routing is the vast majority of our issues. People configuring the router incorrectly in version 1 of Ionic. So we decided to make that kind of an after-the-fact thing in Ionic 2. So Ionic 2, your primary means of navigating around are a push-and-pop navigation system, very similar to iOS. It's designed to follow Cocoa Touch, the patterns that they put in place. That Cocoa Touch is the Apple framework for building mobile apps. And what's nice is that the URL is still a first-class citizen. You just don't. It's kind of reversed, right? So with a traditional router, you say navigate to this URL and I'm going to load this code. In Ionic land with Ionic 2, you say push this code, execute this logic, and then the URL will update to match the state that you're in. So it's a little bit of a flip of the paradigm, but the end result is very, very similar, but we find that it's much more intuitive, and especially when you're getting started. So what we really like about this is you can add these deep links or routes to your application later. You don't need to do it up front. The other big thing is Ionic 1 could feel a little sluggish on older devices. Not any more or less than anything else does. It's just that really, really old, crappy Android devices are really old, crappy Android devices. There's nothing you can do about that. So one of our big focuses with Ionic 2 is performance. And how can we make this thing so it hums at 60 frames per second all the time? For any animations, transitions, scrolling, we managed to accomplish that in the overwhelming majority of use cases. Previously in Ionic 1, due to basically the browsers of 2013, they did not have great scrolling support, to put it lightly. We had to roll our own scroll. It was all a JavaScript-based scroll in Ionic 1. So now when you swipe around, it uses the native Chrome or Safari scrolling mechanism, so it's much more performant. In addition to that, all the animations take advantage of the latest basically layering and properties that you can set in CSS to get the ultra-fast animations. So Ionic 2 is super fast, and like your actual usage. In addition to that, the change detection and things of that nature in Angular 2 are just insane. They're by far the fastest of any framework out there. So continuing into the look at what's new, there's also new components and many improvements to the old components. They look a lot better, they're much more performant, and frankly, they're easier to use. Some of the biggest complaints with Ionic 1 were always around like the picker controls. So if you imagine you're a web developer, right? You have like a drop down or a select thing. there's in Ionic, or in mobile browsers, I should say, there's no way to like exit that prompt until you select an item. So that is kind of a terrible user experience, because imagine if you accidentally tap this thing accidentally. Well, with Ionic 2, we implemented our own controls for those things instead of using the built-in ones. So it's much more user-friendly. You can click, there's an accept button, there's a cancel button, and you can customize that as well. But overall, they just feel better. They feel like how you would expect an Android control to feel in native land where the web comes up short. The select control is a huge improvement, in my opinion. So basically, the gist of it, we can sum it up, is anything that was like a 7 or lower in Ionic 1. Now you're like, it's all right, you know, whatever. We make do. It's a compromise. We set out to make those things better in Ionic 2. And honestly, I know I'm biased, but I think we freaking nailed it. So what Ionic always has, just in case you guys aren't familiar with it, I don't know to what extent everyone has used Ionic here, but Ionic is all about these mobile-first UI controls. In addition to that, we think it's really, really, really important for people to write tests. So Ionic's always had a dependency injection system for testing. In addition to that, we provide things that are not necessarily UI controls like navigation, persistence, deep linking, pretty much anything that you would need to build an actual robust app. In addition to that, we have a separate open source product. It's not part of the Ionic framework. It's a little bit separate. It's called Ionic Native, which is a set of plugins or libraries that we've open sourced that allow you to access the underlying hardware in a generic way, we'll say. So let's say you need to use the camera, right? So you would install Ionic Native at camera, or excuse me, at Ionic Native / cameras, the plugin. Once you have that installed, you just use the simple APIs there, and that'll abstract whether you're in Cordova, whether you're in a progressive web app environment, or whether you're in Electron. Likewise with the file system and some of the other ones. So this is a work in progress. It's a very community-driven project that we are working. We've got a couple people working on this all the time. It's a really cool thing. So the thing that gets me juiced up the most about Ionic, and this is what I work on the vast majority of my time, is the developer experience. So people say they love working with Ionic. I know Eric did at the last meetup that I talked at. That they just like it, that it's a pleasant thing to work with, that it works for the most part, that it's fast, and it's even kind of fun. Like, I am so freaking thrilled by that. That is just awesome to hear. And it's like a universal thing. I've never heard anyone say that they don't like working in Ionic. So I'm like, it's all the feels. So something that I hear a lot is, so it's like Bootstrap. You get these pretty UI elements. You don't need to be a designer. You can make things look nice on the web. That's awesome. It's Bootstrap. Well, in many ways, it is like Bootstrap. But there's way more to it than that. So Bootstrap does some things for you. That gives you nice buttons. It can give you scroll spies, all that fun stuff. But none of that is oriented towards mobile. We are more than that. We have all these controls that are focused on mobile, and we're all batteries included, everything you need to build an app. The reality of the situation is that if you are using native browser controls in mobile, the browser is never going to be sufficient to provide a great user experience because of how the W3C works. Once they implement a spec, they can revisit it a little bit and tweak it, but they can't add new functionality to it or subtract functionality from it for the sake of backwards compatibility. So all of these UI controls that were invented from the days of, I think it's resistive touchscreens, like the really old Palm Pilot where you have to use the stylus, all the UI controls from those days, like they haven't really evolved that much, and they all kind of suck, and they're never going to get better. So that's the hard truth, and the web's kind of screwed in that regard, in my opinion. So having said that, Ionic specializes in making them awesome and user-friendly on mobile. So this is not like a company thing, this is just what I always tell people. Everybody uses Bootstrap to make websites today. Like everybody, like 9 out of 10 people. It's so popular, it's crazy. Most popular project on GitHub too. It's the de facto standard. We want to make Ionic the de facto standard for web apps. Bootstrap is for sites, Ionic is for web apps. So let's dive into this. Let's build an app. We're going to start from nothing, and we're going to build out a small little tiny app. So we'll see how this goes. Live coding is always super risky, if I can even get Chrome to exit. Okay, here we go. So we're going to start fresh here. I'm not going to create the project because, like I said earlier, it takes about 2 minutes to do. And time check. I don't think I have 2 minutes. I don't. So we're just going to start with an assumed project. To do that, I would run. This is probably really small for you guys, so I will make it bigger. Ionic start my app blank. That's the command that I run from our Ionic CLI to spin up a new blank app. So let's just pretend I did that. That's going to install all your dependencies for you. It's going to get the whole thing set up. You do need -v2 in the public version, but I'm cool and have the soon-to-be-released private version where you don't. So let's hop on over here where I've done this. I'm just going to run Ionic serve. Actually, I'm going to open my favorite editor, VS Code, and then I'm going to run Ionic serve. So as you'll see here, what this does when I run Ionic serve, this is all the stuff that I work on, so it's super cool. We spin up a project that we call app scripts, which manages the build process for an Ionic app. And this handles everything from watching your files for change, to transpiling the TypeScript to JavaScript, to starting Webpack, to parsing your deep links, to all kinds of a million things that the user doesn't need to know or care about. If you're just starting out an app, you don't want to have to implement Webpack and Babel. You just want to implement your app and your vision. So that's really what app scripts does. So I ran Ionic serve. It popped open a Chrome window. And let's make that bad boy a little bigger. And this is what the blank starter looks like. It says the world is your oyster. I really like that. I mean, it kind of sounds cliche, I guess, but it really is. You can implement anything as a programmer. So we have our app here. Let's jump back to slides so I don't totally butcher this whole thing. Okay, sorry about that. So I don't know if that's big enough, but we'll see what we can do. You know what, I'll just do it in VS Code where it's a little bigger. So let's look at the world is your oyster. Right here, this is just a vanilla Angular 2 component. And this is all, for the most part, standard JavaScript. These decorators, as they're called at the top, it's called an ES 2017 decorator. It's on the track to be standardized in 2017. And it's basically a function. That function takes a selector, or an object that has a selector string as an argument. That could be your custom element. And then it can take a template string or a template URL. In the case of Ionic, this is my starting template. The world is my oyster. So it has these custom tags. This doesn't look like any div I've ever seen, and that's surely not a span. Well, that's kind of this new component world that we're in with React, and Polymer, and Web Components, and Angular 2 even. So all of these bad boys are Ionic components, or Ionic directives, if you will. Typically, every page is going to have a few of these in common. Ion header is, you guessed it, your header, and Ion content is really the body of your page. So what I mean by the body is it knows where the header ends, and then it just fills the rest of the available space. Then I have a padding directive here, applying a little bit of padding to it. Very, very simple. This doesn't look like anything too crazy. Once you learn the directives, it's very, very easy. And then as you can see, the class down here as well. This is just an empty class that is exported. It doesn't do anything. It's just a standard ES 2015 class. So we kind of covered, I guess, what jumps out. So we'll skip that. So let's add some data to this. We're going to build this into an actual app. You got to start somewhere. The world is our oyster. So let's add a provider to it. So a provider is something that's injected in Angular land. It uses the dependency injection system, and it gets populated into the instance of that entity at runtime. So in my case, I have a home page component, and I'm going to make this so that this takes a provider instance. You know what? Let's actually look. I previously implemented my provider so that I wouldn't screw it up. Here, but let's just take a look at this class. So the first thing that jumps out to me is, again, I'm just exporting an ES 2015 class. And in that, I have a method called getEmails. Then within that method, this is decorated with a type definition. Now this is all TypeScript again. What's nice about this is the return type of this method. It says, I am going to return an array of emails. Well, what is email, right? JavaScript has no idea what an email is. Well, email is really an interface in TypeScript land. Any object that fits these fields is considered an email. So this is more synonymous with like a Java or a C#, or I would say a more traditional object-oriented programming. So here, I'm returning my list of emails. So I just pre-populated some dummy data here. It's going to be used in our sample app. For all intents and purposes, it's nothing interesting. So I'm going to go ahead and wire that bad boy up. So in my home component, I'm going to import my provider. Email provider from the relative path to the provider. And let's just let's put TypeScript through its paces here. Let's just say I wanted to import something with a typo. Right off the bat, TypeScript is going to tell me I'm doing something wrong. It has no idea what that class is in the case of provider, which I typed incorrectly. So in my opinion, this is hugely beneficial in environments where you have continuous integration or where there's lots of people collaborating and there's prone to be collisions and things of that nature. Huge time saver. So if I want to get an instance of the email provider, I'm going to use the Angular dependency injection system to do that. So right off the bat here, I'm adding an email provider to my constructor. I now can access that in an Ionic lifecycle event. IonView will enter is a lifecycle event that fires before my component is rendered on screen. And then I can use my provider by accessing it off this. This represents the class instance. So email provider dot get emails. And let's just I'm going to declare a list of emails here. So I'm going to import the email interface from the provider so that I know what type my data is. And I'm going to say, we'll call this so I'm basically making a member right here on my instance, and it's going to be empty by default, and it's of type emails. Then I'm just going to do this. This.emails equals this.email provider get emails. So that is going to load a list of emails in theory from the provider, and let's make it actually do something. Now I'm gonna cheat a bit here and pull in the code I previously wrote so I don't butcher it in my live coding session. So let's take a look at this. It's kind of a unique syntax when you think about it. But I'm modifying my ion content to, rather than saying the world is your oyster, to take an ion list component. Within that list, I'm going to loop over my list of emails, and I'm going to get access to each individual email of said list of emails. And I'm going to be able to perform an operation on it or stamp out a template. So in my case, I'm going to make an ion item. Item is a component that belongs to a list. And I'm going to print out the subject of that. So this is, I don't know why this doesn't. So now that I saved that, as you can see in my Ionic app, right away we know that it's building. And then it's automatically refreshed once the data's there. So this is great, right? We have a very, very basic bare bones app with my 6 most recently received emails. And, but I don't want to work in material design. I want to see how this is going to look on iOS. So I'm going to switch the Ion platform. There we go. So I totally changed the style just by flipping the mode of the application. Now it inherits all of the iOS look and feel. So that's great. This is my hello world. Let's dive in and actually make this do something cool, because right now it's just kind of a lame list. So let's get back into slide land and make sure we're not missing anything. The other thing that's worth mentioning is I have all these types in my code because I like strict typing. That's who I am. And that's how the Ionic team does stuff, because we support this huge product that hundreds of people contribute to. If you are writing your own Ionic app, you don't need all that type stuff. It's totally optional. TypeScript does not need to validate your stuff. You can use TypeScript as a synonym for Babel, where it just works as a transpiler. So, okay. So let's dive into actually making a styled list. The coolest thing about Ionic is I am just an average Joe, developer Dan. I suck at design like every other developer out there. I don't know how to make things look pretty on my own. I rely on Bootstrap for my websites to make them look nice, or in this case, Ionic for my apps. So we're gonna spice up this really vanilla list. So the first thing we're gonna do, so let's just pull in a tad bit more template code to make this live. So, okay, let's walk through this. I modified the code right here. So now my Ion item is no longer the main element here. This is actually a button. An Ion item is just a directive passed to it. I'm still going to loop over my emails there, but now I've added an Ionic icon to it. So we have our own icon set called Ionicons. There's like 900 icons or something in there. And basically, I'm going to show 2 different icons, whether an email is favorited or not. So one will be a gold star, one will not. It'll just be regular lame star. And then I'm also going to show some more styled details of that email. So let's see how this looks. And again, this is all down here. This looks very familiar to everybody. We're all familiar with P tags, H tags, so on and so forth. So in the background here, I saved my file. And sure enough, this bad boy had already refreshed with live reload. Now I have a list here. Looks a little bit better. It inherits some native formatting. Your header takes on a darker, bolder theme. Just like iOS does, your second line is always a little bit lighter. But when I click around here, nothing actually happens, right? Nothing is enabled. This is not actually a live app. So let's figure out how to enable that. How do we make this interactive? So let's bind to a click handler. So I want it so whenever I tap on any of these bad boys, I want to be able to favorite the thing, right? So how you bind to an event in Ionic is exactly how you do in Angular 2. So you do parentheses, my event type, and then you specify a handler on the instance. So what I'm going to do is say email clicked. I'm able to pass the email instance to it. And let's implement that email clicked method in this class. So I'm going to pass an email to it. It's of type email. What I'm going to go ahead and do is just say email.favorited equals the reverse of email.favorited. Page is going to refresh. And just like that, I can click any one of these and it's live. And I realize this is not the most advanced app in the world, but there's really not a whole lot of code here to do it. It's all just basic template binding using Angular 2. So now let's make this thing a little more interactive. So one of the things that I think is particularly cool about Ionic is how easy it is to add like super rich interactions such as like swiping and, well, obviously swiping is a good one. Totally lost my train of thought, I'm sorry. But so the first app that I really wanted to push Ionic to the limit with was I wanted to make a clone of Mailbox. I don't know if you guys remember that app from a few years ago. But basically you had all your emails, and most of them are really annoying, so you just like swipe them away really quick. I'm like, that's a pretty intense app. And I tried to implement the same thing on iOS directly, and it was kind of hard to do. With Ionic and just using like our basically event system and our gesture system, it's actually really easy to do. We're not going to go to that level today, but we're going to just add a little swipe handler on here. So I can swipe left or right and get access to some buttons. If I want to archive an email or delete it, I can do all of those things. So I'm going to need to pull in a little bit more code to do that. So this right now, it's evolved from an ion item to a button. Now we need to make this a sliding list, or a sliding list item. So I believe the directive, and I'm going to verify this, is an ion item sliding. So I'm going to copy and paste this code because I know I'm going to butcher it otherwise. And let's just talk about it. So very, very similar to before, but rather than looping on the button, I'm going to loop on this sliding item, which is really just a container to the button. So this part in here, the guts of this ion item sliding are identical. However, down here within the container, I have this ion item options where I can specify a side to that cell, or the item, if you will. So on one side, I'm going to have the left, and then, of course, the right for the other. But within here, I can specify one or more buttons that I want to show up when I swipe the thing left or right. So with that said, let's take a look at that. The other thing that's worth mentioning is we have all kinds of built-in styles to make your stuff look nice. So you're going to see some buttons here that are different colors. So we have our primary style, which is platform dependent what color it is, but it's blue, I believe, on iOS and Android. Likewise, you have danger is another color, which, as one would assume, danger is red on all platforms. And then within those buttons, I have more ion icons, which again, I'm not doing anything too crazy. I just reference the Ionicon, and it just magically works. So let's do the library load here again. So we're building. Our app refreshes. Now if I want to slide left or right, this is like no code, and it's totally for free to make a complex interaction like this. If you were to roll something like this yourself or with Bootstrap, it'd be a nightmare. It'd be hundreds of lines of code. So for the sake of completeness, let's just add the one more step to this little sample project, and let's support archiving and then deleting emails. So again, those are going to be very, very simple functions to accomplish. So right here on the button handler for those, so this is the archive button. I'm just going to add another click handler, archive email. And I still can reference that same email from above because it's in the same scope. And we'll add a delete, whoops. We'll add a delete method here. All right, so let's go ahead and implement that. So I'm going to do just use an array filter function since this is all in memory anyway, and we'll do the exact same thing for delete as well. So basically what these lines are saying is loop over every email in this list and filter it out if the email does not, or include it, I'm sorry, if the email does not equal the email that's passed to it. So it's just basic functional programming right there. Let's refresh it and let's just do it. So I'm going to archive one, and it did not go away. Oh, I know why. I'm sorry. List.emails. Sorry, that's on me. All right, there we go. If we were so inclined, we could use Angular animations to make this nicely scroll up when you delete one. Basically, you would want to animate height on the cell that you're removing, move it up to 0, everything will nicely slide up. Very common thing to do on mobile, just because it looks nice. I didn't do it here because it's probably outside of the scope of this Hello World talk. But that's basically it. Does anyone have any questions? Yes?
How does swiping translate to the web?
How-
Are there sections that you can say one included only mobile and sections you only want included the web?
So how does swiping or just like content in general?
Yeah, just the swiping, like the swipeability.
Yeah, I mean, it's all just events. So we use Hammer.js for all of our event delegation and handling. So if you can configure this yourself if you'd like, but say you have a pan event, that's where you drag your finger X amount of pixels and you can determine what X is. You could also do a swipe, which is, it has its own curriculum to be a swipe. There's a whole fleet of gestures and how they're recognized. You can configure the recognizer. So to answer your question, really, it's up to the user on how they would decide to do that. Body would be the same on mobile and the web as it stands now. We are really just starting our foray into desktop. Yes?
What's the best migration path from Angular project into Angular 2?
Start fresh. It's not that hard to port them. It really depends on how much code you have, right? Because logically the design patterns are the same, but the implementation details of using like classes instead of controllers and TypeScript instead of ES5 JavaScript, it's just a little bit different. We're not going to, we're too small a company to support building out a fancy upgrade path. You could try Angular's thing, but honestly I've heard bad. I haven't heard a whole lot of good about NG upgrade.
So just new get and go.
Yeah, pretty much. But honestly, the directives within Ionic, so the custom tags, pretty much stayed the same. There's a few new ones and some slight modifications, but for all intents and purposes, they're the same. The Angular design patterns and templating language, the templates themselves look different, but that's largely a find and replace operation to change them. So you could, write some scripts to do that. But the design pattern itself is the same. You're just binding to this instead of scope. If you have an Angular 1 app, you can use the controller as syntax. That'll get you much closer.
Okay.
Yes?
So the Ionic team is pretty small, but the product's pretty successful. What kind of processes do you guys follow in good practices?
We work on what we determine is the most important for our users. So every single day, we argue probably, maybe a little bit too much as a group, of what the most important thing to work on is because there's 7 million issues. Honestly, it's crazy how many people use Ionic, and we have 6 people working on the framework team, and we probably get 200 to 5, not probably more than that. I bet over 1,000 responses on GitHub a day, so it's overwhelming. Honestly, most of us don't respond very much on GitHub anymore because it's just, I shut my notifications off because it's overwhelming. It's a total time suck if you do that. You don't get anything done. Once a week, I'll just burn through 50 of them or so. Take a couple hours.
So do you guys have daily stand-ups so they can follow Scrum or Kanban or anything that works for you guys?
We don't. Some of the teams that Ionic do with the framework team doesn't. We try not to follow any structure like that. We don't have any meetings unless absolutely necessary. That's not entirely true. Every Monday, we have a morning meeting at 9 o'clock, and we publish all the meeting notes for that. But yeah, pretty much we're just trying to survive. There's so many issues out there, and most of them are user error. It's not like Ionic's super buggy or anything. It's just every single popular open source project is just overwhelming. Nobody's solved the problem yet, so we're no different. Yes?
How close is it, or how feasible is it to do single code base for your mobile stuff and then your progressive web apps or electronic?
I think it's extremely doable. It depends to what extent you want to use native hardware on the device. Ionic natives get more and more mature every day. So Ionic native started out as a Cordova-focused project. We have shifted that with our version 3, and we are starting to support more of the new browser APIs that only Chrome supports so far. So, for example, things like Get User Media. If that API supported, we want you to use the native camera functionality in the browser. If it's not, then fall back to either Cordova or Electron on whatever platform you're on. But that's our vision. We want people to be able to develop in the browser 99% of the time because it's such a pleasant experience developing in Chrome. Once you go into device land, even in Ionic, which is pretty good, it's still not as nice. It's with us, you can tap in with Chrome to still debug. and Safari too. But once you get into like the native plugin land, it's kind of a nightmare to debug. This is someone else's code for one, but we're all web developers. We're not Objective-C or Java or any of that. So it's just easier. We're trying to make everything work through Ionic Native, one API that basically gracefully declines. That's not the right word. Yes, good grades. Any other questions? Yes, Eric.
How's the migration experience from NG Cordova to Ionic Native?
Drop-in replacement with Ionic Native 1 and 2. Version 3 is where we started making breaking changes to support basically Electron and progressive web apps better. So total drop-in replacement with 2 and 2 is totally fine. Yes?
How is Ionic funded? Is it the companies who are providing services?
No, we have venture capital. So we have several successful businesses under like the Ionic brand, like Ionic Creator. Probably shouldn't talk about revenue, but they make plenty of money. But yeah, largely venture capital right now because so many people are using Ionic. The goal is to turn it into this huge billion-dollar business. Of course, the framework itself will always be free. That's what's so cool. I get to work on this free thing, and I don't have to give the sales pitch. It's really awesome. Any other questions? Yes.
So how do you use the Nationwide app on Ionic? Because I'm looking at the showcase right now, and Nationwide is like one of the new ones.
I don't think I want to talk about that, but they are a lot of companies use Ionic, way more than you think, and the vast majority of them don't want us to talk about it.
Gotcha. A lot of people.
So the biggest one that is willing to talk about us and be like big cheerleader, Untapped. So Untapped just released their new version, and it's really awesome.
It's awesome.
So yeah, so that's kind of where we're at. But yeah, we've seen Ionic is tremendously popular with internal apps or from like big companies that already have a ton of web developers. They just want to be able to crank out these little one-off apps. Like we see so much of that. Yes.
Was your decision about the router in spite of the Angular 2 router, or just before it? Like, did you just know you were going to do that?
We knew we were going to do that. We've had push and pop in there for a long time. We have our own router, or deep linker, if you will. We are trying to loosen our coupling on Angular so that we are less basically tied to them. That if they take too long to ship a feature, we don't, or they make radical breaking changes, we don't need to update our entire code base. Like during the development of Ionic 2, we've been very transparent with them. We have a great relationship with the Angular team. But honestly, it was really painful because they were breaking APIs all the time. So Ionic 2 was constantly like, we couldn't do any forward development because we would implement these features and the API is dramatically different. So we had to fix it all the time. Now they're pretty well stable, so that's largely a thing of the past. But in general, we're a really small company. We can't be owned by Google. Just because Google has their own priorities, Angular is primarily an internal tool for Google. That's why it's built, so that Google can make better Google web apps. And they have thousands of them. So for us, we have different goals, right? We make tools for you guys to use. Google makes them for their people. So we need to make our stuff easier to use and be able to iterate faster, essentially. So expect to see less Angular internals in Ionic going forward, but you'll always still use the Angular and userland. Any other questions? Yes.
What's the story with Ionic 2 and support for larger screen sizes like iPads? I know Ionic 1 is not great supporting.
Yeah, so Ionic 1 was not designed for it. It happened to work on the web since it's a web app, but it was definitely mobile-centric. Ionic 2 first test citizens are larger screens. So we're starting that now. We just released Ionic 2.1 last Wednesday, which has a new grid system. The grid is heavily inspired by Bootstrap's grid. In addition to that, because that's still not sufficient for many use cases, we have a split pane system where you can have basically master detail views or as many independent navigations as you want, and as your screen shrinks or increases, those will show up and render.
Yeah, our new app looks fine on iPad. It looks great.
Yeah, the split pane stuff people are loving that. It's going to be really awesome. And it's still just a baby. Like we just started split pane maybe a month ago, but desktop support is like our number one priority. Progressive web apps are going to be huge, so we're all in on that. Yes.
Is this support for BlackBerry?
No. I think BlackBerry registered with a 0% market share. So insignificant, they didn't even hit the 0.01. Any other questions? Yes?
I don't know how much the difference it'll make on this one, but can we go back and look at material for this one?
Yeah, absolutely. You sure you don't want to see Windows Phone?
It's exciting, but
So this one, yeah, it's not all that different, but like you get the ripple when you click, you've got the drop shadow at the top. Yeah, like if you implement an actual app and not a hello world, you can make some pretty awesome apps that look dramatically different on the two platforms. It's really just, I guess, what you're used to. I mean, I don't really use Android that much. I'm an iOS guy, but material design looks so different with their colors that they look totally different, whereas iOS is so white and like flat. Any other questions? All right, well, thank you guys very much. I hope it didn't seem too sales pitchy. Hopefully the hello world wasn't too boring. Yeah, it was a good time. Thank you very much for having me.